Okay, we're alive. Thanks, Paul, for joining me today. Really excited to get to talk about this episode of Getting to Hell Yes. For the audience, thanks for joining. Paul Marks is a statesman in the industry, and as I would probably say, it was the original podcast with respect to multifamily. 8 years at a radio show going on AM radio, and that has converted into podcasts, and now a bunch of different endeavors. And really excited to kind of get through and chat with you, Paul, with respect to Getting to Hell Yes. Remind everybody the purpose of the conversation today is to understand what buyers are going through as they're trying to figure out the alternatives that they've got before them, that unblock the challenges that they're facing, and then ultimately, from a seller perspective, how to respond to that. And so Paul's talked to thousands of people in the industry, so there's probably no better candidate to actually have cite his experiences, both in his kind of the podcast world, in addition to him being an evangelist for the industry, in addition to his personal experiences in selling in the market. So, Paul, quick little background on yourself. How'd you end up in this role? And we'll go from there.
Well, I've been a supplier partner for over 3 decades in the multifamily industry. And by the way, when you say I'm a statesman, that is only because I'm old. It has nothing to do with anything else. So, I've been around a long time, and I've chuckled with a lot of the guests I have on my radio show who have been around as long as I have, about the fact that there's young folks that are in the industry today working on properties or working on management teams that have never been through a real estate cycle to see the ups and downs. And they've only been on the upside over the last decade. So people are in for, as we go through these cycles, I've been through all of them in the last 30 years plus. So I've seen what's happened. But I as a supplier partner, I realized about 8 years ago that a little over 8 years ago, that there was no radio show that was really dedicated to multifamily industry operations. And with that in mind, I come from a media background. My father was in the advertising business for many years. And as a child, he would take me to radio stations and TV stations, and when he would make commercials, and I was able to kind of get a feel for that environment, so it wasn't intimidating to me. And I started a radio show called Multifamily Matters. And as I said, it's a weekly 1-hour show, and we've had the who's who of multifamily folks on there. Some of them have already retired, but I caught them as they were getting out of the industry, and a lot of them are up and coming. So it's been an interesting thing. And then earlier this year, I formed with a great multifamily guy, Mike Brewer, who I'm sure many of your audience knows, a company called the Multifamily Media Network. And now we have over 16 different podcasters on the network who are all practicing multifamily industry leaders and industry icons. So they get to share their knowledge and expertise in different genres, whether someone's looking for information on leadership or someone's looking for information on maintenance. We cover most every genre that you can think of for multifamily. So it's something that's really kind of taken off in less than a year. And we got a lot more exciting things that are going to be happening in that. But I'm happy to be here and happy to help any of your audience with their journey through the sales process.
I know. I mean, as someone who's relatively new to multifamily, I appreciate. Well, I was talking to somebody else earlier this week on the energy level to learn and to share in multifamily is really, it's practically unfamiliar to me. Like at my industry that I was kind of back, I grew up in transportation and heavy industry, energy. Everything was very, it would be a scarce mindset, right? If you get more, I get less. Whereas in multifamily, genuinely feels that there's a sharing within the people that are in the business, and everybody wants to do better because the industry it's people's homes, right?
Yeah.
And so, as someone who's new to the industry, I'm grateful to your collection of collection of thieves that are out there, sharing their insights and their experiences in the world, because otherwise it's not really well documented anywhere.
Yeah.
And this is a great medium. And so I'll just shout out the gratitude and everyone that's listening today. You know, why you're one of the guests I wanted to have on, and Mike's lined up is for these conversations around this. And one of the reasons that, you know, Getting Hell Yes emerged is I was really getting curious around why people commit to change. As a, you know, we're a technology provider that provides a new way of doing things. And, you know, as a founder, I often get caught up in telling our story more than listening to what the buyer is looking to solve for. And so as a bit of a conditioning exercise, this podcast emerged as, hey, we got to do some good listening here, right? And so taking a look at your experience and, you know, I think a fresh conversation for everyone that's been listening, because you have so much breadth to your background, but specifically to your water business. So your LinkedIn says Paul the Water Guy. So to kick off the conversation where you get a chance to speak about your commercial business, who is your ideal buyer and why do they buy?
Well, specifically what I do is, and I did not give myself the name, the Water Guy. I had a owner of a property management company, and he owned the assets as well. I think he had about 11 assets that were all just bleeding money when it came to water issues, water conservation issues, and water, as everybody knows around the country, water and sewer rates are increasing every year, and nobody can do anything about that. And a lot of people are trying to get their residents to pay for that, you know, passing it through to the resident, and that's okay in some instances. But as those water and sewer rates increase, what happens is the resident only has a certain budget tolerance that they can spend for the combination of utilities and rent. And the owner of the apartment properties wants to increase the rent. And if
their share.
Yeah. And so if you can't control what the city or whoever's providing the water is doing, you got to figure out a way to reduce the consumption on site. And that's what water conservation does, and what I help clients with. And this gentleman who owned these, he called me with a problem that he was having. And I said, well, that really isn't in my expertise. I mean, that it's water related, but it's really nothing that I do or that I can help you with. He said, yeah, but you're the water guy. You got to get an answer. So he called me the water guy, and I kind of picked it up, and was actually able to help him and get his problem resolved, but I had to do some research. But again, it's water conservation. And what we do is we help multifamily properties around the United States reduce their water consumption and their water bills by 40 to 60% per year by putting some conservation measures in place. So, you know, the one thing I'll say about multifamily, if someone is a supplier partner in the multifamily industry, I know you like to use the word selling, and a lot of people use the word selling, but that's kind of become a nasty word to a lot of people.
Oh, I'm trying to go right at it.
and the reason is kind of a nasty word is because I'm sure you've heard this. Nobody loves to be sold, but they all love to buy. And so, you know, when someone thinks they're being sold,
that's right,
they immediately, you know, dig their heels in a lot of cases, and it's harder to make an inroad. But what you got to find in the multifamily industry, if you're a supplier partner, is who is your buyer. There are certain service providers that have products and services that a property manager would buy, or a regional maintenance manager may buy. That, you know, they're the key contact. And then there's others that a property manager has no power to be able to buy the service. It's got to go up to the corporate level, whether it's on the regional level or vice presidential level, or even in the C-suite. And so who my buyer is typically the C-suite buyer, or that upper executive, because the one thing that I found about multifamily is when you're dealing with a buyer, I'm headquartered in Houston, Texas. There's plenty of multifamily properties in Houston, Texas. There are plenty of multifamily management companies that are headquartered in Houston, Texas, but they have properties all over the country. So if you can provide a solution for them in Houston, where I am, they want that same solution in Charleston, South Carolina, or in San Francisco. And so you've got to be able, if you're in my shoes, I've got to be able to offer that solution to that. And to do that, I have to be on that higher level of executive who can actually become a sponsor, an executive sponsor, if you will, of our efforts and kind of help it circulate throughout their entire portfolio. So that's my buyer.
I find that our experience has been that, with the exception of a very few circumstances, the initiative to solve a problem, it starts at the RM level, or maybe even a little bit lower than that. And it has to bubble up. Like corporate is not looking to buy anything; they're looking to prevent purchases, and so aligning with ultimately it's solving a corporate problem, or at least how we're positioning things. And this is a lesson. Is how we're positioning things is solving a problem at the local level and then reporting up to the corporate metrics, right? So like we've got to be able to, for someone to commit to change for our product, for what we sell, there has to be enough pain within a decision maker's mind to execute on something. And so, and I've now come to change that language where the pain isn't enough. There has to be a blocker in place. And so what I'm trying to find, this is just getting to Hell Yes conversation, is what are their goals and how are they blocked from achieving those goals? And that's helped me really get to understand a little bit more about the buyer than just kind of listing a positive ROI, because every single seller on the planet has an ROI that's going to be positive and beneficial. Otherwise they wouldn't be in business.
Right.
And so what I'm trying to learn is that it's not good enough anymore to not have an ROI, and the blocker is persona. It's at a personal level. Like an individual has to be blocked in order to commit to an initiative to change something. It's been my experience. And so, like on your side, when you tell that story about the fellow that nicknamed you the water guy,
right?
What was going on in their business that they said, okay, enough. I've got this list of priorities right now, maintenance, power, whatever, but I'm going to make water my priority today. So what was happening in that person's business that they said, I need to solve water now?
So in that particular instance, again, as I mentioned, it was nothing that I offered.
Right.
What they have with their problem was that a lot of multifamily properties, they have their plumbing piping in their properties that are either copper or galvanized steel. And that is notorious, especially in certain markets based on the minerals and so forth that are in the water source, for creating pinhole leaks in the pipe.
Mm-hmm.
The problem that he was having was he would have a pinhole leak that would all of a sudden leak. Again, the pipes are behind the wall or in the ceiling. And all of a sudden, the resident would be screaming about the fact that water was coming into his unit through this pinhole leak. He'd send his maintenance team out there. They'd put a patch on the pipe. And then what would happen is a week later, 2 feet away from where they put that patch, another leak would develop, because the problem was the pipe was corroding over a period of time due to those minerals. And so he did not want to try and find a solution where he had to go in and replace all the pipes. He wanted to know, was there something else he could do to resolve that? Because the cost was not just the cost of the lost water or the pipe repair. He had to repair sheetrock. He had to replace carpeting.
Sure.
And so he was looking at his financial statements and seeing all the money he was spending on all these ancillary things as a result of these pinhole leaks. And he wanted to find a solution. And we were able to, and it was an interesting solution that I was able to provide for him. I didn't provide it, but I put him in touch with someone who did. But I had another client who had a similar problem. And what was interesting, he had a 200 unit multifamily property, and 100 of the units were on one boiler system for the hot water, and the other 100 units were on one. And so the first side, he started having problems with. They went in and did exactly what this other owner didn't want to do. They ripped out all the pipes. They had to move residents out of their units while they were doing the work. It cost them $500,000 to repipe 100 units. And when he told me that, I said, you should have called me. I have a solution. It would have cost you $3,000. And when he started having problems on the other 100, he called me and I put him in touch with this person, and they got it resolved for, a few $1,000s as opposed to the 500,000 that they had to spend.
But you bring up a really interesting narrative there, right? So faced with a recurring problem that, maybe conceivably could be punted, right? But ultimately became something they had to act on.
Right.
And that buyer considered kind of conventional alternatives, repiping the whole thing, right? Which included X, Y, Z, how you laid it out, right? And then they started thinking, okay, that exceeds my tolerance level for solving this problem, but there must be another way.
Right.
I'm going to talk to people in the industry and have them connect with people, or offer other alternatives. Because what I'm kind of landing on is that people have a problem to solve that's blocking them, right? In this case, maybe it's resident renewals, right? Maybe it's a capital expenditure kind of like an eventuality that they're facing that they don't want to deal with because it has an impact on NOI, impact on revenue, impact on residents. You're almost going into the lease up situation after you've gotten everybody out to fix all the piping, right?
Right.
And then they go, okay, well, what are my other alternatives? And so that's the part that I find really interesting with respect to getting to Hell Yes, is what are the things that people are trying to consider? So the classic is kind of like hire more people, hire a consultant, outsource, or use technology and process. And like in that example, I just saw this water problem. I can go the conventional route, which is the repiping of everything. And then they went to seek different alternatives. And that's the mindset of somebody who's approaching Hell Yes, because they're already doing the work to solve the problem and they've identified the problem.
Right.
Very interesting.
And let me not push back, but circle back to something that you said. When you're talking about it's important to be able to demonstrate the ROI when you're presenting something to a client. You got to take it one step further and use another acronym that they love, which is NOI. You've got to bring that NOI into the equation for them to really see the benefit. How is this going to affect my net operating income? Mm-hmm. And if it affects my net operating income in a positive manner, if we ever want to put the property on the market, how's it going to affect my property value?
Yeah.
And so smart business suppliers are taking that and actually extrapolating out all the numbers for the clients by providing them a calculator to show this is exactly how you're going to get your ROI, and it's going to affect your NOI, and how it's going to increase your property value. And that's something that a lot of supplier partners are doing that really makes sense.
Oh, totally. And I find it like when talking to people, they're, because that's kind of like the modern convention as a decision maker, if I put a buyer's hat on, you're faced with like, let's say 10 projects that all have positive ROIs. And you might be tempted to force rank them and go, I'm going to go the highest ROI to low, but that's not how the decision making is done.
Yeah.
It's like the ROI is if you go into kind of like get into brain theory and decision theory, the ROI is how you justify the decision and maybe bring other people on board. But the decision that you make is based on some sort of like it's more of a fight or flight kind of caveman kind of decision making framework.
Right.
And then you kind of like convince yourself. It's like the buying a fancy sports car. You might say you need it, it's actually a good value or whatever, but you're just justifying the internal decision to have a fast car.
Yeah, and I want to also push back a little bit on something you said earlier about that a lot of these buying decisions, or the beginning of them doesn't start at the corporate level. There are certain things that do start at the corporate level. I've done countless interviews with C-level executives and so forth that have said, when it comes to looking into things like property management software,
enterprise decisions.
All those things all start at that corporate level. So if you're a supplier partner in that space, that to me would be where you would want to start. Mm-hmm. And one thing that we've spoken a lot about on my podcast and on my radio show over the years is how slow the multifamily industry seems to be when adopting new technologies or new ideas. They're very timid about that.
Mhm.
And they tend to take the lead from what's going on in the hospitality industry.
Mhm.
So, for instance, pricing and revenue management was big in hospitality and travel before it ever made it into multifamily. And actually, people that brought it into multifamily came from the hospitality industry, and now it's used widely all over the multifamily industry. The other thing is that you have certain, I guess, incidents that can also change the way buyers think. For instance, the pandemic. When we entered into the pandemic and touring couldn't be done, virtual touring took off
Yeah.
in multifamily.
And
Whereas
then
before,
access control, and then
yeah,
access control. Right
access
after
control,
that.
exactly. And before that, when I would go to conferences and I'd go to the watch the exhibitor, look at the exhibitors and see what they were exhibiting, and I knew somebody walked in a booth and got a pitch from somebody about virtual touring or access control. I said, "What do you think about this?" He goes, "Oh, I think it's going to have its place, but we're pretty far away from it." Then all of a sudden, pandemic hits, everybody's got to do it, and so they're
Mhm.
quick to adopt it. So those types of things can make a difference in the trajectory of how someone sells.
Well, and I think of the virtual touring as an example. Great analog. Like in that situation, the mentality of the buyer was to capture as much of the market as possible because rents were going up, right? And as they were going up, it was a how can I get my contracted revenue locked in and locked down, and I've got to break through this blocker of showing suites, and so ultimately that comes through, and everyone's like, okay, I'm in, and we'll go through it because like that's an example of something that came from probably. I don't even know what industry that came from because it wasn't in hospitality. Like we didn't really virtually tour
Right.
hotel room, right? But however that emerged, it unblocked a problem that was like a hot button problem. How do I get leases signed?
Right.
Right? Because I want to lock in these, now we look back 2022, 2021 rental rates. Let's get these things contracted because we had a shortage of, there's a situation at the time that had to be capitalized on. And so now, we sell a centralization solution. And for us, I'm always thinking about, okay, what are they trying to solve here? Right? Is it ROI? What is making them commit to change? And I'll kind of offer up what we're hearing different stories, right? Because we presented a very solid, compelling ROI use case, but people are generally still reluctant to commit just on pure ROI. But it's when they're trying to, the great story is like, yeah, we're growing in Nashville and we've got nobody there. Okay, so now you're blocked at the building level. Now that's a bigger problem that's an asset level problem, right? That's not just a operating level problem. Because the NOI that we may be able to save could be debatable, could be, it might come down to conjecture, but ultimately, like it's when you're blocked from execution, and then you kind of like use the ROI argument to say, yeah, you know what, this is something that's actually, we can repeat this model over and over again and save a bunch of money.
Right.
And so when we talk about centralization, it's interesting because like there's it's not fully baked yet, right? Why? I mean, I'll say that, and I think it comes from your show. Like the REITs have figured it out, right? Because they're measured on every single penny kind of thing.
Right.
And so their commitment to change comes from a higher power. But like at the other levels, like when you consider the operators, the owner operators, and maybe even the owners, their commitment to change might have a different motivation behind it. And so what I'm trying to learn right now in our conversations is that, okay, so depending who I'm talking to, they may have a different problem they're trying to solve. Just talked to a major PMC operator 2 weeks back, and their major problem what's causing them to commit to change is because the reviews just came back and they were just completely vilified. Right. And so NOI can kind of go up or down, plus or minus percentage points. If it goes down 10%, we got to do something. But if it kind of goes up and down, we can blame everything else and not, I'm not going to take a personal risk and commit to change and kind of like rattle sabers. But if something like that happens, now they're willing to commit to change. And so it's an interesting conversation because they're not at hell yes yet, but they're at I've got to do something about this and I'm evaluating my alternatives.
Your example that they were having their pinhole leaks. That was their pinhole leaks. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that that's important. Did you? I don't know if you were. Did you attend OpTech?
Yeah, yeah, it was a great show.
So yeah, I was too, and it was all about centralization and automation. I mean, these are the things that the industry is going to be working with now, and the ones that are really out there, the companies, like you say, the REITs have embraced it, but the other companies are able to start figuring out a way to make it work for them.
Mhm.
Are going to be head and shoulders above the competition. I think it's something that really is. It's impressive to see what can be done.
I think that, like, in the 3 days at OpTech that I went through, and I was kind of like constantly, again, like not pitching, but shaping conversations
Mhm.
and trying to ask questions and listen. Like a lot of it is an interview style, right?
Yeah.
And to me, like I went in with one conversation and came out with another conversation.
Yeah.
Because the concentration of individuals that were there that are willing to just jam on it, right? And what was really productive, I would say probably some of the most productive conversations are when I've explained what we solve to somebody, to Paul Marks, right? And Paul's talking to Suzanne. Suzanne walks up, and I'm like, Suzanne's like, oh hey, you're friends with Suzanne. You go, hey, this is Guillermo. I just met him. Da da da. And then you explain to Suzanne what I do. That's the most valuable conversation.
Yeah.
Because it's your interpretation of the problem that I solve, and you're explaining to somebody else, and you've had maybe 20 seconds to have it sink in. That
Right.
helps. Those parts of the conversation, you can't have those in sales calls, right? Because it's kind of one-on-one.
Yeah.
And that's what I found at conferences are so valuable, and that you get that instant feedback loop on their interpretation and how it connects to the problem that they're trying to solve.
Yeah. And let me give you the secret to sales as I see it. And you just hit on it with that example. Perception is everything. And my father told me many years ago something that I've never forgotten. And it is what he said was, it doesn't matter what you think people think. It only matters what they really think. And for you to be able to understand, to get to what they really think, you sometimes have to go in a roundabout way, like that conversation that you just used as an example. So the key to understanding what people think, that's really, if I'm a service provider, I need to figure out how to understand what they really think.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been very productive. And because they're going to reinterpret your message and play it back to you in their terms. And now that's the buyer's voice. And things that I've been resisting, language I've been resisting to use because I just didn't feel comfortable with it. The buyer's voice locks it in because they're framing it in terms of their problem. And that's something that's very difficult to capture. And now it's so much more natural to explain our solution because it fits in a box that's inside the buyer's mind. And that's something that is you need to tease that out through conversations, and you don't get it from just talking. You get it from listening, right?
And I'll say one other thing too, is that what every supplier partner should strive to achieve is to have a client that they have had a successful relationship with start to refer them to people that they know in the industry. And I've been fortunate enough in what I do for water conservation, where I have high-level C-suite clients that are referring me to people that they know because they've seen the successes, and I've built a relationship with them over the years that they are very comfortable with, and they know that I'm not going to lead them down the wrong path. So they're happy to refer without me even having to ask. I'll just say, get an email or run into somebody, say, hi, I referred you to this person, and I'll connect you via email. That's what everybody should strive for. And you do that by building relationships.
Yeah. Oh, without a doubt. I mean, it goes back to I'm hungry, Paul. Paul says, Guillermo, those berries are safe to eat. Right. That acknowledgement, that recognition that here's a solution to your problem that's not going to impair you.
Right.
And that kind of, and that's, the first step is it's not going to hurt you. And then ultimately it's this, an acknowledgement that this is going to solve your problems. I love structuring conversations with a with a current customer and a prospect, if anything, to hear our customer pitch to our prospect.
Right.
And they'll do the talking for me. And I'm sitting there listening into I'm doing everything I can to just shut the heck up. But it's like, I just want to hear how they explain it.
Yeah.
Right. Because they're using their words and they'll talk about things that I didn't think were important.
Yeah, but it affected them in a positive manner on what their needs were.
100%. And the problems that this solves for them.
Yeah. So you learn from that. And it's the same thing like on my radio show. I have sponsors that appear on my radio show as subject matter experts. We don't do infomercials about their companies, but I have them invite one of their clients on to be also a subject matter expert. And when I do the interview, inevitably the client sings the praises of the company. And that means a lot more than the person who's with the company talking about themselves.
Of course. I mean, at the end of the day, we have as sellers, we've got a horse in the race, right? And so we shouldn't be trusted, but ultimately it is trying to get that person that is willing to advocate for you to that market and become your case study. And so our model, we start reinforcing the case study. Like our strategy is the case study strategy. We're not going to be successful. We try and just go on persuasion and being opportunistic, and this is kind of like what we're doing right now is we're spending a lot of I'm choosing to spend 2025, the bulk of it in probably Texas, between Dallas and Austin. We joined the associations. We're getting to know people there because I want to be around. I want to make it very easy for those conversations to happen where, operator A is talking to operator B at a function and I'm there. And so all of a sudden you're part of a topic conversation. And, I call it the bowling pin theory, and I borrowed from Jeffrey Moore, is this it's the effort to knock down a series of very similar looking customers with the most amount of effort is knocking down the first one. And then after that, the other ones knock down each other. Yeah. To do that, you've got to have a real mentality around delivering value to that segment of customers and knowing their problems intimately, because the problems in Dallas and Austin will be the problems in Dallas are different than Austin. And those two are, 3 hours apart. Whereas if I'm trying to sell if you're trying to sell into Tampa right now, that's gonna be a different story than what I'm selling into Texas. Right. And so it's and for the edge that we're trying to get in our conversations, it really leans in on trying to establish that repeatability. And don't get me wrong, we've got leads right now and prospects from, all over the US and we're those conversations are healthy, active, vibrant. But in terms of where we're going to commit our time, it's trying to create those experiences where I'm kind of de-risking the chance of those moments happening by being there. And that's our strategy, right? And that's we'll see how it pays out, but it's better than trying everything all the time.
Well, if you get to Houston, let me know and we'll have dinner, and I'll be happy to introduce you to anybody I can.
Well, I look forward to that. I'll be down there for TAA. That's already booked. Yeah. That'll be exciting. No, it's interesting. I mean, and then in your experience, we're talking about your experience in timing. Have you seen can you give an example of when you recognized somebody was coming to you with a problem that was they're hemorrhaging, so to speak, and you had the solution? And what was that like? What was their reaction when you said, here's the new way, here's the path forward, here's the road to, you're parting the seas for them?
Well, let me use Houston for an example. The city of Houston, the water and sewer rates here have, I think it was 2022 or 2023, they put in a 5-year plan to raise the water and sewer rates over 5 years annually on every April 1st. And at the end of that 5 years, the water and sewer rates will have been raised 78%.
Wow.
So when you think about it, you start out with a property and you're paying a certain amount of money. And in 5 years, the amount of money you're paying. And if it's a large property, it could be hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. The water and sewer rates were high to begin with. So that's when they are hemorrhaging. Now, what's interesting is when the city announced that the city council had approved this, Well, we immediately started talking to clients and saying, "Hey, you need to start thinking about doing something."
Mhm.
Nobody seemed to be, nobody, but most people
They
just,
elected the punt.
yeah. They had other things they were working on.
Yeah.
Then the first increase comes in, much larger than they had seen in past years, and then a certain group got on board and said, "Yeah, we need to do something." And then the next year, when it came in again, another group came on board. So
Yeah.
a lot of the things that are happening that are out of their control, at
Mhm.
least in my line, cause them to have that bleeding that they have, and then they come to me and I say, "Okay, let's analyze your consumption. It's no cost to analyze your consumption. We'll see what we can save." And then when I say you can save $200,000 a year, it's like, whoa! I never thought that was even possible. And what does
Yeah.
$200,000 a year in savings do to the NOI, and what does it do to the property value based on whatever the cap rate is?
So,
It's a no-brainer.
yeah. And I find it, in that situation, the forcing function is a regulatory change,
Right.
right? A lot of times I'm hearing forcing function is external, right?
Yeah.
Like it could be a refinancing of a building. It could be a meeting with the shareholders. It could be whatever. It's external. That forces people to kind of recognize that they've got to do something different. And then in that case, you kind of had a ticking clock. And presumably the clock was ticking louder every single year because you have to do something. And by the way, I can save some money along the way.
Yeah.
And I imagine like in that point in time, 2022, 2023, you've also seen the curve on rents is starting to come down a little bit.
Yeah.
So NOI from going, like it would have been really hard to sell what we sell in the markets the last 7 years because you could just raise rents. And the residents will just bear the brunt of it all.
Right.
Now, because of costs and because of lack of people and everything that's going on, it's hard to staff. And because if you can't staff your maintenance roles in our situation, you have a bad residence experience.
Right.
And so like now you're stuck. And then if you're an operator, and then some of the hunches that we're working on right now, and I call them hunches because no one's bought through this yet. But like if you're an operator, like a PMC, then it's a case of trying to figure out, not only am I losing my collectible rent, my fees, but I'm also losing my ability to win new clients. And so there's kind of like there's a compounding effect to them versus just the direct lack of talent in the buildings. So it's kind of something when we're working through with our conversations.
Yeah.
Close to time out here. How do you adapt your conversation when you're talking to owners versus operators?
When you say owner versus operators, you're talking about like a third party.
Yeah, third party.
Yeah. Well, that's always a challenge for anybody selling anything, because owner operators, they can make a decision what's right for them, and the third party management company has got to get owner approval to spend anything that's significant. So you've got to kind of hold the hand of the third party operators and suggest in a nice way that why don't we set up a call with the owner's rep, because otherwise I'm expecting them to carry my water and try and sell something that they may not truly understand.
Yep.
You don't get the benefit when they do that of hearing whatever objections they've got, the owner has, or whatever questions they have when they present it. So if you can try to figure out a way to, whether it's in person or whether it's on a Zoom or whether it's on a conference call, when they make that presentation, you be present so that you can answer questions. You get them to agree to that. I think you're much further along than letting them try and sell it on their own. Owners, asset owned or owned assets with REITs and things like that. That's a much easier, not much easier, but it's, you can get to hell yes a little bit easier, I think, than you can.
Yeah. Well, they have the decision and they have the consequences, right?
Yeah, exactly.
One thing I'm starting to hear, and just starting to hear it, is that the third parties are taking it because it's getting more competitive for clients. They're starting to activate a consultative approach. So I'll let that play out and see how that plays out over the next year. But they've got to start adding more value because the fees are getting so compressed but they've got to go even beyond that. So we'll see how that plays out. I hope that that's where it ends up, because then both the operators are taking an advocacy position for innovation within the industry. Like I said, we'll see how that plays out.
Yeah.
Last couple questions here. Piece of advice for someone who's selling into this business, trying to recognize those key moments. What should they look for when they're trying to find a buyer who's in the hell yes state?
Well, I mentioned earlier in the conversation, but you need to really understand who your buyer is, at what level in the industry. Once you know that, then you got to figure out the best way to reach them. A lot of people are proponents of being involved in local associations. You mentioned that, you're going to be in Dallas and Austin, you've joined those associations. And that's a great way for people to do it. In my particular case, I sell nationally. So I've got to, I can't be a member of every association. I can't attend every association event. So I have to be a little bit more creative in the way that I find and get those buyers. And I'm able to do a lot of that through the fact that I've got a little bit of exposure media wise, which is always, something that helps. But I think knowing who your buyer is and then how to reach them the best way in the area that you're selling in, if it's a geographic area or if it's a regional area, it's a local geographic area, regional area, that would be my advice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would agree with that. And then who should we talk to next?
Who should you talk to next on your show?
Yeah.
Well, I would give you, you said you're talking to Mike Brewer, right?
Yeah, we're trying to set something up. We're back and forth.
Well, he would be a great guy. And I would tell you that we have someone new to our roster who really won't be starting until the first of the year as a podcaster.
Oh, yeah.
But she has a wealth of experience in the industry as the president of a management company. She's kind of gone out on her own now doing some consulting, but her name is Cecilia Casio.
Okay. I'll reach out to her.
I'd be happy to connect you with her.
Outstanding.
And what's interesting about her is her expertise is really in the affordable area.
Oh yeah. That's an interesting space.
And that's a completely different way of thinking than, market rate is. Just
Totally.
as student housing is completely different than any of the others. So,
yeah.
So Cecilia, I think, would be a great person to talk to.
Wonderful. I'll reach out to her and I'll lean on you for introduction.
Yeah.
Well, thank you everybody for listening in. This will be pushed out in a podcast format and probably within a week. Appreciate everybody. And so, look for that on Apple or on Spotify. Paul, thank you so much for your time today. This was exceptionally insightful, a lot of depth to the conversation. And I appreciate you kind of willing to kind of dig into the discomfort of talking about selling. But I hope it's a conversation that's valuable for everybody, because it's very interesting how people make decisions and commit to change. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Wonderful, everyone. Take care. Have a good day.